Hey there, guys. So I'm actually sitting here waiting for a bunch of files for my latest Disney Guy review to transfer onto my various thumb drives so I can actually get into the meat of editing them. And I figured while I'm sitting around waiting, I should talk to you guys about a movie that I just saw recently, Christopher Robin. So, as always, I tried to give a little bit of time for people to see this movie before I talk about it, but if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want me to spoil things for you, I'm probably going to go into some plot details and things like that. So pause this video now, go watch the movie, and then come back and watch it after you're done. So that's your warning, and now that we're out of the way, let's jump into talking about the film. So yeah, Christopher Robin, you talk about a movie that kind of hits you in the childhood feels. So this was an interesting take on kind of the live action remake kick that we're on recently with Disney. Sort of in the vein of like a Maleficent, in that we took a story that we know from the animated feature and just kind of put a new twist on it. This twist obviously being Christopher Robin as a grown-up, so in a lot of ways it's kind of like Hook, where you get the childhood character who we know now growing up and trying to sort of recapture that childhood. And yeah, like I said, Hook is going to be the kind of easy comparison to make for this movie because there are similar plot points, but I do think that there are some things that were done here that were different, and I just think that it was executed well in this vein. And honestly, it's not the first time that two movies have had kind of similar plot points, so it's not the end of the world that those two can get kind of related to each other. So anyway, as for the movie, as you guys well know, as I expressed often in my many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh review, I love Winnie the Pooh. I grew up with Winnie the Pooh, and it really is, to me, that character really does embody childhood. So having this movie is kind of the perfect next step to that, where you have Winnie the Pooh who embodies childhood. Well, we all unfortunately do grow up after a while, so the question becomes, how do we kind of come to terms with that childhood, and how do we try to keep that childhood in us as we get older and as things start to happen? So that's really one of the cruxes of this movie, and what I thought that the film did a really good job of, we sort of start the movie in that last scene from the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which I mentioned in my review, was almost unbearably sad in and of itself, in that it was the farewell to Christopher Robin because he has to go away to school. So we almost start right in there. So in a lot of respects, this kind of picks up where that animated film left off. But what I thought they did that was really interesting was for the next 5-10 minutes after the scene where Christopher leaves the 100-Acre Wood, we see Christopher Robin's life afterwards. We see all the various things that happened to him. We see that he learns about his parents passing away. We see that he has to go off to fight a war for England. We see him then marrying, having a kid, and his job and all that stuff. And what's interesting about that is that it then helps the audience understand why and how Christopher Robin came to be the person that he is now. Because what I thought was interesting was it's very easy to kind of do this, where you have this character who's so caught up in his childhood and all that stuff, but then he grows up and he wants to reject all that. That's not really the case here. He's not necessarily actively rejecting his childhood. He's just kind of grown past it, and he's grown beyond it. And the reason why he's grown beyond it is because of the things that we saw he experienced in his life. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting and a smart way to kind of get us to understand the character of Christopher Robin as he's going to be presented in this movie. And while we're talking about the character of Christopher Robin, I thought Ewan McGregor did a great job portraying that character. Ewan McGregor, I've always liked as an actor because he does seem to have a whole lot of range, and with a character like this, where there is a little bit of there's some depth in this character, because we see the years of stress that have gone on him, but we also see that little boy inside of him, especially as the movie goes along. So you kind of have to go two different ways with this character, and I thought Ewan McGregor did a really good job of kind of blending those two elements of Christopher Robin's character in his portrayal. But what really makes this movie interesting to me is that, again, it very easily could have been an almost sickly sweet story where because sometimes that can happen with Winnie the Pooh, as much as I love him, where it becomes so over the top, sweet and happy. And that's really not the direction that this movie went. The first, man, I'd say 50 minutes to almost an hour of the film, it's almost like uncomfortable to watch because we see how different Christopher Robin is, especially when he's interacting with Pooh, and we see how childlike Pooh is and how innocent Pooh is, as opposed to just how kind of jaded Christopher Robin has become. And in a lot of their interactions, it's very interesting, especially when they first get to the 100-Acre Wood. That's probably like the hardest part to watch in the whole movie because it's when Christopher Robin kind of hits his breaking point with Pooh, and that's not something that I thought I would ever say or see, is Christopher Robin and Pooh having an argument. But so again, my childhood was raging inside watching that. But yeah, but for as uncomfortable and as tough to watch as some of that stuff is, it's also really good, and it's really, because it does two things. One, I think that a lot of older viewers will relate to that. Now, I'm not as old as Christopher Robin is portrayed in the movie, so there's some stuff that he's going through or that he's accustomed to that I can't really relate to, like he has a kid and things like that. But there are certain elements to this whole growing up, trying to hold on to your childhood, but also trying to move past it and kind of the real world and the adult world sort of taking over your life and sort of like becoming one of your top priorities. That sort of stuff I certainly relate to, and I think a lot of people around my age relate to. So it does help you kind of get into the mindset of Christopher Robin when you can see what he's going through and you can relate to that. So that's why it's important. It's also very important because then when Christopher Robin realizes the error of his ways and we see him kind of return back to a kind of more childlike, a kind of the evolved form of childlike Christopher Robin, this kind of helps show off that juxtaposition, and it helps the audience really feel good then when he does sort of realize that he needs to kind of relax a little bit, for lack of a better term. And yeah, I think one of the more underrated aspects of this movie in general is going to be a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the back and forth, especially from Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is very interesting in this movie because obviously, he's childlike and he's innocent, and it's the Pooh character who we know. But what comes out of that innocence and that kind of childlike mentality are these strange, like, one-liner nuggets of wisdom. He's almost like this existential figure in a way where, he says these very simple but very deep things, and a lot of that is kind of attributed to his childlike way of thinking, but they make sense, and they especially make sense to someone like Christopher Robin who, needs to kind of rekindle his childhood and things like that. So I thought that was very well done, and there was a couple of times during the movie where Pooh would say something and I would give like a that's really good. So yeah, definitely if you didn't catch it the first time, watch it back and kind of you can see a kind of Pooh's dialogue in a different light, and because it is very deep and it's very hard-hitting almost, which is again not something I would have thought I'd have said about a Winnie the Pooh movie. I also thought how it was kind of interesting that they went the direction that all of this is pretty much real. I wasn't really sure how they were going to address this whole thing because, obviously a kid going to the 100-Acre Wood and talking to stuffed animals and all that stuff, I wasn't sure how they were going to address all that, but it turns out they pretty much just kind of played it straight as if, the real world exists, but also the 100-Acre Wood exists. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I thought it worked well enough. There were some elements that ended up that I thought were going to be bigger plot points and ended up not being really being resolved. Like, we had like a policeman and people see the 100-Acre Wood gang speaking in the real world, and we just sort of dropped that for the most part. But yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I thought it worked out well enough. Also, the voices of the residents of the 100-Acre Wood was just very nice for the soul. Jim Cummings is fantastic. He did the voice for both Pooh and Tigger, and it's the voices that pretty much you remember, especially if you grew up watching the animated television series and things like that, because it's just that's their voices. So it was kind of cool to actually hear the authentic voices coming from those characters. And though we didn't have the authentic voices for a bunch of the other characters, I thought they all did a good enough job. And also, it's one of those things where you can kind of get away with not having the exact voice for a piglet or for an owl or for a rabbit and things like that. But Pooh and Tigger especially, those voices are so iconic and those characters are so iconic that I feel like it would be very strange to hear a different voice coming out of them. And evidently other people felt that way too, because from what I understand, they actually did recast Tigger early on, but test audiences were not having it because that wasn't Tigger's voice. So Jim Cummings did that as well. So yeah, even though the other voices got changed, those didn't bother me so much, probably because we had Pooh and Tigger, and it helped kind of lead to an authenticity about the movie, and it kind of helped lead to a connection to the cartoon Winnie the Poohs and to the cartoon series and to the previous movies by having those same voices, and it helped make it kind of feel like this is a continuation of that story, and this is, you know, another chapter in that story. And speaking of voices, Brad Garrett as Eeyore was a brilliant decision. And Eeyore is easily one of the funniest guys. I've always loved Eeyore because he always just makes me laugh in the dark humor sort of way. And he's spot on in this movie. And every line that he has is laugh out loud funny, it feels like. So it got a big reaction in my theater every time he spoke. That was easily one of my favorite characters because something about gloomy old Eeyore and his matter-of-fact way of talking about, you know, doom and gloom is just the best. And we can't talk about this movie without making special mention of the music because it really is awesome. It's this. We have the blend of the old standbys that we all grew up loving in Up, Down, Touch the Ground, and the Tigger song. Granted, performed a little bit differently, but different isn't always a bad thing. But that was blended with some new songs. But the nice thing is, all three of the new songs that were presented in this movie were all written by Richard Sherman, who of course was one of the two who wrote the original songs alongside his brother. So the new songs still fit into Winnie the Pooh. It didn't feel like they were this kind of out of left field or these weird like hokey pop throw-ins or something like that. They still felt in the realm and in the world of Winnie the Pooh, and I actually really enjoyed them. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, or if you did and you missed it, stick around during the credits, because during the credits there's this little mid-credit scene that actually has Richard Sherman performing one of his new songs in like a commercial sort of setup. So it's really cool. It's awesome. Anytime you get Richard Sherman music, it's so classically Disney, and it just screams Disney. And the style that he wrote it, and the style that he wrote these songs fit in perfect with Winnie the Pooh, and they just added this nice touch onto what was already, I thought, an enjoyable movie, and it added kind of a nice modern but also familiar touch to it with the new songs. So yeah, I was looking up some reviews of this movie afterwards, and though I saw a lot of heavily positive ones, it was sort of a mixed reaction, and some of the negative reviews kind of harped on just how like overly sweet it was, or how somewhat predictable it was. And look, while I understand that, and while I certainly understand that point of view, I guess my question is, what do you really expect? You know, it's Winnie the Pooh, it's Christopher Robin. But yeah, while I don't think that Christopher Robin is the greatest of the live action I guess remakes, we'll call this one, that Disney has released, I thought it was still perfectly acceptable. And if you kind of know what you're looking for going into it, I think you'll really enjoy it. Again, I grew up with Winnie the Pooh. I love Winnie the Pooh. So I went in looking for some nostalgia, looking for, you know, a touch of happiness. I thought I actually got more than what I expected, because I wasn't really sure what I expected when I came in. But getting, you know, a slightly more mature story and a slightly deeper story, I thought added to my enjoyment of it. You know, it definitely affected me, especially when, like I was saying, I do kind of relate to the Christopher Robin character, especially in the early going and the things that he's going through. So, yeah, I think if you go into it kind of knowing what to expect and kind of knowing what you're going to get, I think that you're going to enjoy it. If you're going in expecting some magnum opus, yeah, then obviously you might leave a little disappointed or just kind of not feeling. But I think especially if you love Winnie the Pooh, you will greatly enjoy Christopher Robin. So I don't think that that's like a groundbreaking statement, but it's true nonetheless. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts about Christopher Robin. One other thing I wanted to mention. So obviously, when you go to a movie, you get trailers beforehand, and one of the trailers that we got that I hadn't actually seen yet was for Dumbo, and it's the Tim Burton version that we had heard about was coming out for some time, and there's now a trailer out for it. And all right, so it looks fine. I'm sure it'll be, I'm sure it'll be fine. Here's the problem that I'm beginning to have with a lot of these live action remakes is that they all sort of feel like they're shot the same. Like the visuals seem very similar, the settings seem very similar. So that's just a concern that I'm having with some of these, is that we're going to get burnout, or that they're just going to start to kind of blend together after a while. Again, I thought it looked fine. It definitely looked like if you took maybe like the live action Cinderella and kind of smash it together with Greatest Showman, you'll get Dumbo. Which again is fine. I like both of those movies, and if it's a combination of those two, I'm sure I'll enjoy Dumbo. But yeah, that's just because I started having this kind of thought. This wasn't a live action remake, but I started having this thought when I saw the trailers for that Nutcracker movie that's coming out, and that it looks like a lot of other movies that we've seen. Like it looks like Alice in Wonderland, which was also a Tim Burton film. So yeah, that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Again, I hope that I'm wrong, that maybe when you go to the movie it does feel totally different. But just from the trailer, it looked like Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland. It looked and felt like those films and in that time period and that sort of stuff. So, just my opinion, just something to keep in mind. So yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for me. Like I was just telling you guys at the beginning, I'm in the process of transferring footage for my next Disney Guy review, which is, of course, The Great Mouse Detective. So it's all shot, it's all filmed, it's all ready to go. It just needs to be edited. So I'm going to try to bang that out throughout the week. And hopefully by the end of the week, you guys will have a brand new Disney Guy review from me. So look forward to that. And also, I already know what I want to do for the next video after that. It's going to be a smaller, slightly more fun video. If you are a patron on Patreon, I actually talked about what that video will be there, and if you're not, well, you'll just have to wait to find out, or of course, donate to the Patreon, and then you get the access to all the videos early, and you get to find out little secrets like that as to what my next video will be. So, there's my cheap plug for the day. So yeah, I think I'm going to go back to work on consolidating all my files and editing my next Disney Guy review for you all. And I will see you all hopefully really, really soon. Bye!